Move faster, worthless. Even the dirt beneath our feet serves more purpose than you." The words hit like shards of ice against already frozen skin. Lyra felt them lodge deep in her chest, sharp and familiar, joining the collection of cruelties that had shaped her into something small and forgettable. Beta Senna's voice carried across the ceremonial platform with practiced ease, loud enough for the gathering pack members to hear and nod in agreement. Lyra kept her head down and scrubbed harder at the bloodstains on the ancient stone, her knees aching against the rough surface. The crimson marks had been left from yesterday's hunt display, where the strongest wolves had torn into fresh kills to demonstrate their power before the upcoming bonding ceremony. Her grey cloth turned darker with each pass, the metallic scent of old blood mixing with the harsh bite of the cleaning solution that burned her already raw hands. Around her, the pack moved with purpose and excitement. Tomorrow would mark the most important ceremony in generations. Alpha King Darius of the Northern Territories would arrive to choose his Luna from among the noble females, binding two powerful bloodlines and securing political alliances that would reshape the supernatural world. The very air hummed with anticipation and barely contained energy, as wolves prepared for an event that would be remembered for centuries. But not by her. Never by her. Look at her, scrubbing like the servant she was born to be, someone whispered, though not quietly enough to spare her feelings. Laughter followed, the kind of casual cruelty that had become the soundtrack to Lyra's existence. Can you imagine if she tried to present herself tomorrow? That pathetic grey wolf of hers would probably cower behind her legs. More laughter, always more laughter. Lyra's wolf stirred restlessly inside her, a flicker of defiance that she immediately suppressed. Her wolf had always been different, wrong somehow. Where other wolves radiated strength and dominance, hers felt muted, grey in more ways than just colour. The pack elders had declared it defective when she first shifted at 13, a cruel twist of genetics that marked her as fundamentally broken. Some wolves were born to lead, others were born to serve, and some, like her, were born to be invisible. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ceremonial grounds that had been carved into the mountainside generations ago. Stone amphitheatre seats rose in terrace circles around the central platform where Lyra worked, each level representing a different rank in the pack hierarchy. At the very top sat the Alpha's throne, hewn from black granite and inlaid with silver that caught the light like captured moonbeams. Tomorrow, Alpha King Darius would claim that seat and survey the assembled females below, choosing the one whose bloodline would strengthen his reign and bear his heirs. "She's getting the stones dirty just by touching them," Beta Senna observed, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her crossed arms. Everything about the beta female screamed authority and breeding, from her glossy black hair to her designer clothes that probably cost more than Lyra earned in a year. "Perhaps we should have her use her tongue instead. It might be more effective." The suggestion sent fresh ripples of amusement through the gathered wolves, and Lyra felt heat crawl up her neck despite the morning chill. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse, that any sign of spirit or defiance would be crushed twice as hard. Better to endure. Better to be nothing than to invite their focused attention. A commotion at the main entrance drew the pack's attention away from their casual torment. Lyra risked a glance upward and felt her breath catch in her throat. Lady Celeste had arrived. The Alpha King's intended bride moved through the ceremonial grounds like she owned them, which she practically did. Everything about her radiated perfection, from her flowing golden hair that caught sunlight like spun metal, to her elegant silver dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. Her wolf was strong, a pristine white that spoke of ancient bloodlines and carefully maintained power. Where Lyra faded into backgrounds, Celeste commanded every room she entered. "My lady," Beta Senna immediately abandoned her sport with Lyra to rush toward the approaching noblewoman, her voice taking on the sycophantic tone reserved for those who could advance her position. "You look absolutely radiant. The Alpha King won't be able to resist you." Celeste's smile was as perfect as everything else about her, but it never reached her ice-blue eyes. "Thank you, Senna. I trust everything is being prepared to my specifications. This ceremony must be flawless. I won't have anything tarnishing what should be the most important day of my life. Of course, my lady, we've attended to every detail." Senna's gaze flickered back to Lyra with obvious disdain. Even the servants are being particularly thorough in their cleaning duties. Lyra kept scrubbing, but she could feel Celeste's attention settle on her like a cold weight. From her peripheral vision, she saw perfectly polished shoes step closer, close enough that she could smell the expensive perfume that always surrounded the Alpha King's intended mate. "This one seems dedicated to her work," Celeste observed, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant trouble for whoever had drawn her notice. "Tell me, girl, are you excited about tomorrow's ceremony?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Lyra's hand stilled on the stone, her pulse quickening with the kind of fear that came from being suddenly visible to someone with the power to make her life infinitely worse. She kept her eyes down, and her voice barely above a whisper. "I am honoured to serve the pack in any way I can, my lady." "How appropriate!" Celeste's laugh was like crystal breaking. "And what of your wolf? I'm sure she must be simply beside herself with anticipation for witnessing such a momentous occasion." The mockery in her voice was unmistakable. Everyone knew about Lyra's defective wolf, just as everyone knew she would never be anything more than what she was in this moment. A servant on her knees, cleaning up after her betters while they planned futures she would never be part of. "My wolf knows her place, my lady," Lyra managed, hating how her voice shook despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Yes," Celeste said softly, her tone somehow more dangerous for its gentleness. "I suppose she does. See that she remembers it tomorrow. I would hate for there to be any confusion about the natural order of things." The threat was delicate but unmistakable. Lyra nodded quickly, desperately, anything to make this attention go away and return her to the safety of invisibility. After what felt like an eternity, she heard the click of heels moving away as Celeste continued her inspection of the ceremonial grounds. The pack members gradually dispersed, following in Celeste's wake like planets orbiting a brilliant star. Their excited chatter about tomorrow's ceremony faded into background noise as they moved toward the main compound, leaving Lyra alone with the blood-stained stones and her own churning thoughts. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, being treated as less than, accepting that her broken wolf marked her as fundamentally unworthy of anything better than scraps and scorn. Tomorrow she would serve at the ceremony that would bind the two most powerful wolves in the territories, and she would do it with a smile painted on her face while her heart quietly broke at witnessing a love she would never know. That had always been enough. It had to be enough. Because the alternative, hoping for something more, dreaming of a different life, imagining that she could ever be anything other than what everyone told her she was, would destroy her completely. Lyra returned to scrubbing the stones, her movements mechanical and practiced. The blood came away slowly, requiring patience and persistence to remove completely. Just like everything else in her life, it was messy work that someone had to do, and that someone was always her. Tomorrow would bring the Alpha King and his choice of mate. It would bring celebration and joy, and the start of a new era for their pack. But for her, tomorrow would bring exactly what today had brought, and what yesterday had brought before that. The knowledge that she would always be exactly what she was now, invisible, insignificant, and utterly forgettable. The sacred grove had been transformed for a ceremony that would reshape the supernatural world. Ancient trees, their bark carved with runes older than written history, stood as silent witnesses to what was about to unfold beneath the silver light of the full moon. Flowers that bloomed only in moonlight carpeted the forest floor, their petals glowing with soft luminescence that made the entire clearing seem touched by magic. Lyra stood at the edge of the ceremonial circle, her mother's wedding gown flowing around her like liquid starlight. The dress had been preserved by Elder Mira through 20 years of waiting, its silver silk and moonstone embroidery as pristine as the day Queen Selene had worn it to her own mating ceremony. The royal crown rested on Lyra's head, no longer a symbol of revealed identity, but of accepted destiny, its ancient magic humming in harmony with the power that flowed through her royal blood. Around the grove, the entire pack had gathered to witness something unprecedented, the true mating of their revealed queen to the Alpha King, who had chosen her over politics and propriety. Torches burned between the trees, their flames dancing in the night breeze, while pack members stood in reverent silence, understanding that they were about to witness history in the making. Elder Mira moved through the ceremonial preparations with the grace of someone who had waited decades for this moment. She had officiated at countless mating ceremonies during her long life, but none had carried the weight of this one. This wasn't just the joining of two individuals, it was the restoration of a bloodline, the healing of a pack, and the fulfillment of destiny that had been denied for 20 years. "Are you ready, Your Majesty?" the elder asked, using the formal title that still made Lyra's heart skip with wonder and responsibility. Through the mate bond, she could feel Darius waiting on the other side of the grove, his own emotions a complex mixture of joy, reverence, and protective love, so fierce it took her breath away. His wolf was practically vibrating with the need to complete what had been interrupted by politics and lies, to claim his mate before the goddess and the pack, in a ceremony that no earthly power could undo. "I've been ready my whole life," Lyra replied, and meant it. Every moment of suffering, every year of believing herself worthless, every instant of pain had led to this moment when she would bind herself to the mate the goddess had chosen for her before she was even born. The ceremony began with the calling of the 4 directions, ancient words that summoned the blessing of earth and air, fire and water. Elder Mira's voice carried clearly through the grove as she spoke the ritual phrases that had been unchanged for millennia, connecting this moment to every mating ceremony that had come before and every one that would follow. Darius entered the circle from the eastern path, wearing the formal robes of his station, but moving with the fluid grace of his wolf, barely contained beneath human skin. When his storm-grey eyes found hers across the sacred space, the mate bond flared between them like golden lightning, visible to every witness as proof of their supernatural connection. "Who comes to claim this woman as mate?" Elder Mira asked, though the answer was written in the very air around them. "I, Darius Stormwind, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, come to claim Lyra Silvermoon as my true mate, my queen, and the other half of my soul," he replied, his voice carrying to every corner of the grove with absolute conviction. "And who accepts this claim? I, Lyra Silvermoon, rightful queen of the Silver Moon Pack, accept this bond freely given and gladly received. I claim Darius Stormwind as my mate, my king, and my eternal partner in all things." The formal words released something ancient and powerful into the grove. The very air seemed to shimmer with magic as the goddess herself blessed their union, moonlight streaming down through the canopy to bathe them both in silver radiance. Elder Mira approached with the ritual blade, its edge gleaming with supernatural sharpness. "Blood calls to blood," she intoned. "Let your essences mingle as your souls unite." Lyra held out her hand without hesitation, feeling only the slightest sting as the blade opened a small cut across her palm. Silver light welled from the wound, her royal blood glowing with inner fire as it pooled in her cupped hand. Darius stepped forward and offered his own palm. his alpha blood mixing with hers in a union that sent sparks of golden light dancing through the grove. The moment their blood touched, the mate bond completed with a force that made the ancient trees sway. Every wolf in the grove felt the power of it, the recognition of a connection so profound that it transcended individual existence and became something greater than the sum of its parts. "By blood you are bound," Elder Mira declared. "By choice you are mated. By the goddess you are blessed. What magic has joined, let no earthly force divide." But the ceremony was far from over. The formal mating required the union of their wolves as well as their human selves, a joining that would link them on every level of existence. Together they shifted. Lyra's transformation was fluid now, her silver wolf emerging with graceful power that made the watching pack gasp in wonder. Beside her, Darius's massive black wolf appeared, the legendary Fenrir finally free to claim his mate without political interference or social barriers. The two wolves moved toward each other in the centre of the sacred circle, their eyes locked in recognition of a bond that had been written in the stars before either was born. When they touched, nose to nose in the traditional greeting, silver and gold light exploded around them, the very essence of their souls intertwining in patterns that would endure beyond death itself. For a moment that lasted eternity, they shared consciousness completely. Lyra felt Darius's memories flowing through her, his loneliness before finding her, his struggle with duty versus desire, his fierce pride in her strength and courage. In return, she shared her own journey from hidden princess to revealed queen, her years of believing herself worthless, and the moment when his wolf had chosen her and changed everything. When they shifted back to human form, they were no longer two separate beings bound together by ceremony. They were truly mated, their souls permanently intertwined, their destinies forever linked. Elder Mira approached with the final element of the ceremony, twin crowns that had been crafted for this moment alone. Darius's was wrought from black silver and starlight, its design echoing the power of storms and winter nights. Lyra's matched her mother's crown, but had been modified to reflect her dual nature, queen in her own right and mate to an alpha king. "By right of blood, I crown you Queen Lyra Silvermoon, rightful ruler of the Silver Moon Pack," Elder Mira declared, placing the crown upon her head as the pack erupted in howls of joy and recognition. "By right of choice, I crown you King Darius Stormwind, mate to the queen and protector of the realm," she continued, crowning him as consort and equal partner in rule. The ceremony concluded with the pack's formal acceptance, every wolf present bowing in submission to their crowned leaders. But this wasn't the forced obedience that Marcus Silverclaw had demanded through fear and manipulation. This was genuine loyalty freely given, the pack's recognition that their true leaders had finally taken their rightful place. As the formal ceremonies ended and the celebration feast began, Lyra found herself surrounded by pack members who had once ignored or abused her. Now they approached with genuine respect and not a little awe, seeking forgiveness for their treatment of someone they hadn't recognized as their queen. "Your Majesty," Beta Senna said, her voice trembling with emotion as she approached the head table, "I owe you an apology that I can never adequately make. The way I treated you, the things I said, are forgiven," Lyra said simply, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned to rule through mercy rather than fear. "We were all deceived by the lies we were told. What matters now is that we move forward together." The feast continued deep into the night, with pack members celebrating not just the royal mating, but the return of legitimate leadership. Stories were shared of the old days under Queen Celine's rule, tales of justice and prosperity that painted a picture of what their future could hold. When the celebration finally began to wind down, Darius took Lyra's hand and led her away from the crowd, through moonlit paths to a private chamber in the royal wing that hadn't been used in 20 years. The room had been prepared for them, filled with flowers and candlelight, its ancient stones warm with magical heating that made it a sanctuary against the night's chill. "My queen," he said softly, pulling her into his arms as they stood before the great window that looked out over the packlands. "My mate, my everything." "My king," she replied, her hands framing his face with infinite tenderness. "My heart, my home." Through the mate bond, they shared not just love, but complete understanding. The servant girl who had scrubbed floors and endured abuse was gone forever, replaced by a queen who would rule with wisdom and compassion. The Alpha King, who had been trapped by political necessity, was free to follow his heart and his wolf's choice. "I love you," Darius whispered against her lips, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I love you too," Lyra replied, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of starlight and silver fire and the ancient magic that bound them together. Outside their window, the pack lands stretched beneath the moon, peaceful and prosperous under the rule of leaders who had chosen love over politics, truth over convenience, and each other over everything else the world had tried to offer them. Their reign had begun. 3 months had passed since the mating ceremony that united two souls and restored a bloodline, and the Silver Moon Pack had transformed under the leadership of their true rulers. Where once fear and intimidation had maintained order, now there was respect and genuine loyalty. The pack lands prospered as they hadn't in 20 years. Trade routes reopened, and neighbouring territories that had once viewed them with suspicion began seeking alliance. Lyra stood in what had once been her mother's private study, reviewing reports from the border patrols with the confidence of someone born to rule. The room had been restored to its former glory, ancient tapestries depicting the pack's proud history hanging beside maps that showed their growing influence. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the silver crown that rested on a velvet cushion nearby, no longer a burden of destiny, but a symbol of accepted responsibility. Her transformation from invisible servant to beloved queen had been profound, but it was the smaller changes that meant the most. Pack members who had once stepped on her now sought her counsel. Servants who had ignored her existence now approached with genuine respect and affection. Most importantly, the reforms she had implemented were creating a pack where worth was measured by character rather than bloodline alone. "The Omega housing project is ahead of schedule," she told Darius as he entered the study, his own morning patrol completed. "Elder Mira says the new dormitories will be ready before winter sets in." One of her first acts as queen had been to improve living conditions for the pack's lowest-ranked members. No longer would wolves like she had been forced to live in cramped, cold quarters while nobles enjoyed luxury. Every member of the pack deserved dignity and comfort. Darius moved to stand behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders with the casual intimacy of true mates. Through their bond, she felt his pride in her accomplishments, his love for the compassionate leader she had become. "The Border Scouts report increased activity from the Eastern Territories," he said, his voice carrying the professional concern of an alpha protecting his lands. 3 different packs have requested formal meetings about trade agreements. Word of our prosperity is spreading faster than we anticipated. It was a problem Lyra had expected. Success bred attention, and not all of that attention would be benevolent. Some neighbouring packs would seek genuine alliance, while others would probe for weaknesses they could exploit. The key was determining which was which before extending trust. "What do your instincts tell you about their intentions?" she asked, leaning back against his solid warmth while studying the reports spread across her desk. "Mixed," Darius admitted. "The Ravenclaw pack seems genuinely interested in reopening the old trade routes. Their alpha sent formal greetings and a gift for our mating, traditional and respectful. But the Shadowmere territory concerns me. Their scouts have been testing our borders, probing response times and defensive positions." Lyra's enhanced senses, sharpened by months of using her royal gifts, caught the subtle tension in his voice. Through their mate bond, she felt his wolf's unease, the instinctive wariness of a protector who sensed potential threats to his pack and mate. "They think we're weak," she said, understanding the dynamics at play. A pack led by what they see as a former servant, and an alpha who chose love over political convenience. They expect us to be vulnerable. "Let them think it," Darius replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent months watching his mate grow into her power. "Their assumptions will be their disadvantage when they realize what they're actually facing." The door opened to admit Elder Mira, her ancient eyes bright with the satisfaction of someone who had lived to see her deepest hopes fulfilled. In her hands she carried a leather portfolio that bore the seal of the Northern Council, the governing body that oversaw disputes between major packs. "Your Majesties," she said, offering a respectful bow that still made Lyra slightly uncomfortable. She had asked the elder repeatedly to drop the formal address, but Mira insisted that proper respect must be shown to legitimate authority. "The Northern Council has responded to your request for recognition." Lyra felt her stomach tighten with nervous anticipation. Formal recognition by the Council would legitimize their rule in the eyes of the supernatural world, but it also meant scrutiny from ancient authorities who might question how a supposedly dead princess had suddenly reappeared to claim her throne. Elder Mira opened the portfolio and withdrew a document written on parchment so old and formal it seemed to radiate authority. By unanimous vote of the assembled elders, the Northern Council formally recognises the restoration of the Silver Moon bloodline and acknowledges Queen Lyra's rightful claim to the Silver Moon territories. Relief flooded through the mate bond as both rulers realised the political implications. No neighbouring pack could claim their rule was illegitimate if the Council itself had blessed it. Any challenges to their authority would have to go through official channels rather than simple conquest. "There's more," Elder Mira continued, her voice carrying a note of barely contained excitement. "The Council has invited you to attend the Harvest Conclave, the first time in 50 years that a Silver Moon heir has been welcomed at the gathering of regional leaders." The Harvest Conclave was legendary among supernatural politics, a meeting where the most powerful alphas and queens gathered to negotiate treaties, settle disputes, and shape the future of their world. Lyra's parents had attended regularly before their murder, but the invitation had died with them. "When?" Darius asked, already shifting into tactical planning mode. 6 weeks, Elder Mira replied, "enough time to prepare properly and make the kind of impression that will cement your position among the great packs." Lyra stood and moved to the great window that looked out over the packlands, her mind already working through the implications. The conclave would be their formal introduction to supernatural society, the moment when she would need to prove that the servant girl who had scrubbed floors was truly gone, replaced by a queen worthy of her bloodline. "What challenges do you foresee?" she asked, because Elder Mira's wisdom had guided her through every major decision since her awakening. "Political ones mostly," the elder replied honestly. "Some will test your knowledge of ancient protocols, others will probe for weaknesses in your alliance with Darius, looking for cracks they can exploit. A few may even challenge your right to rule directly, claiming that 20 years of absence invalidates your bloodline claim." "Let them try," Darius said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of an alpha whose protective instincts had been triggered. "They'll learn what happens to anyone who threatens my mate." Through their bond, Lyra felt the surge of fierce protectiveness that her safety always inspired in him. But she also knew that her greatest protection at the conclave would be her own strength, her ability to prove that she was a queen in her own right, rather than simply an alpha's mate. "I'll be ready," she said with quiet confidence. "We'll be ready." The weeks that followed were intensive preparation for what would essentially be her debut on the supernatural world stage. Elder Mira drilled her on ancient protocols and formal etiquette, while Darius helped her refine the political instincts that would keep her safe among wolves who viewed every interaction as potential warfare. But it was during one of their evening strategy sessions that Lyra first noticed the change in her body that would reshape everything once again. She was reviewing trade agreements when a wave of nausea swept over her, so sudden and intense that she had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The scent of the dinner being prepared in the kitchens, normally appetizing, now made her stomach revolt violently. Darius was beside her in an instant, his hands steadying her while concern flooded through their mate bond. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" Lyra's enhanced senses were screaming at her, picking up changes in her body that she had been too focused on political preparation to notice. Her scent was different, carrying undertones that spoke of new life beginning to grow within her. Her emotional state had been more volatile lately, joy and protectiveness alternating with inexplicable moments of vulnerability. "I'm not ill," she said slowly, wonder creeping into her voice as understanding dawned. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a miracle made manifest. Through their bond, she felt Darius's shock transform into overwhelming joy, his wolf howling with triumph at the knowledge that his mate carried their heir. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands moving protectively to her still flat stomach. "My senses don't lie," she replied, covering his hands with hers. "I can smell the change in myself, feel the new life beginning. We're going to have a child." The implications crashed over them both simultaneously. Their heir would be born to rule, carrying the combined bloodlines of the ancient Silver Moon royalty and the powerful Stormwind Alphas. The child would be a bridge between old and new, living proof that their union was blessed by forces greater than politics or convenience. "The Conclave," Darius said suddenly, his protective instincts flaring. "If other packs learn you're pregnant, they might see it as vulnerability, a distraction that could be exploited." "Or they might see it as strength," Lyra countered, her hand moving to rest over her womb where their child grew. "Proof that our bloodline continues, that the future of both our packs is secure. A pregnant queen isn't weak, Darius. She's powerful enough to create the next generation of leaders." Through their bond, she felt his wolf settling as he recognized the truth in her words. Their child wasn't a weakness to be hidden. It was a victory to be celebrated, evidence that love and destiny had triumphed over 20 years of lies and murder. "Our child will be born free," Lyra said, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had carried her from servant to queen. "Free to rule, free to choose their own path, free to know their heritage from the moment they draw breath. Everything our enemies tried to steal ends with us. Everything good begins with them." As if responding to her words, the mate bond flared with golden light, and for just a moment Lyra could swear she felt a tiny spark of awareness from the new life growing within her. Their child already responding to the love and power that surrounded them. The future stretched ahead like a golden path, bright with promise and possibility. The pack was prosperous, their rule was secure, and now their legacy would continue through the child who would inherit the best of both their bloodlines. Queen Lyra Silvermoon stood at the window of her ancestral home, crowned and mated, and carrying the future within her, and knew that the scared servant girl who had once believed herself worthless was truly gone forever. In her place stood a ruler who would shape the supernatural world for generations to come. 1 year had passed since the night that changed everything, and Queen Lyra Silvermoon stood on the royal balcony that overlooked her thriving packlands, her hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her belly where their air grew strong and healthy. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and silver, its light catching the ancient stones of the palace that had finally been restored to its former glory. Below her, the pack moved through their daily routines with the confidence and prosperity that came from being led by rulers who genuinely cared for their welfare. The Omega housing project had been completed months ahead of schedule, its comfortable dormitories a testament to the principle that every wolf deserved dignity regardless of their rank. Trade caravans moved regularly along roads that had been abandoned for 20 years, bringing wealth and resources that benefited the entire community. The Harvest Conclave had been a triumph beyond her wildest expectations. Rather than the political minefield she had feared, it had become her formal introduction to supernatural society as a leader worthy of respect. Other queens had welcomed her with genuine warmth, while the great alphas had quickly learned that underestimating the former servant girl was a dangerous mistake. Several major trade agreements had been signed, defensive pacts negotiated, and marriage alliances proposed for the next generation, assuming, of course, that her child would want such arrangements when they came of age. Lost in thought again? Darius's voice carried the warm affection that never failed to make her heart skip, even after all this time. He emerged from their private chambers onto the balcony, moving to stand behind her with the unconscious grace that had first caught her attention in the ceremonial arena. "Reflecting," she corrected, leaning back against his solid warmth as his arms encircled her from behind. Through their mate bond, she felt his deep contentment, the satisfaction of an alpha whose pack thrived and whose mate carried their future. "Do you remember what you asked me the night we met in the sacred grove?" "I asked you many things that night," he replied, his lips finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that always made her shiver. "Most of them involving how quickly we could complete the mating bond." Lyra laughed, the sound carrying across the balcony like silver bells in the morning air. "You asked what happens now, after everything we had learned, everything that had changed. You wanted to know what came next." "And now I know," Darius said, his hand covering hers where it rested over their growing child. "This, all of this, the pack healing, our people prospering, and the promise of tomorrow growing stronger every day." Through the bond that connected them more deeply than breathing, Lyra shared the memories that had been surfacing more frequently as her pregnancy progressed. Not the painful recollections of her parents' murder, but the golden moments that had come before. Her mother singing lullabies in a voice like wind chimes. Her father's strong hands lifting her toward the stars while he told stories of the great wolves who had ruled with wisdom and compassion. "I used to have nightmares," she said softly, "about our child growing up the way I did. Invisible, forgotten, believing themselves to be worthless, because that's what everyone told them they were." "Never," Darius said with absolute conviction, his protective love flooding through their connection with the force of a tidal wave. "Our child will know their worth from the moment they draw breath. They'll grow up surrounded by love, secure in their heritage, confident in their power. They'll never have to scrub blood from stones or accept cruelty as their natural lot," Lyra added, her voice carrying the quiet strength that had carried her from servant to queen. "They'll never wonder if they deserve better, because they'll know without question that they deserve everything good the world has to offer." The nursery had been prepared with loving care in the rooms that had once been hers as an infant, before murder and treachery had torn her from her rightful place. The walls were painted with silver and gold, depicting wolves running beneath starlit skies and ancient forests where magic still flowed freely. The cradle had been carved from moonwood by the pack's finest craftsmen, its surface inscribed with protective runes that would guard their child's sleep. "Have you given more thought to names?" Darius asked, the question that had occupied many of their quiet evenings together. "If it's a girl," Lyra said, her hand moving in small circles over her belly, "I want to name her Selene, after my mother. She would have been such a wonderful grandmother, teaching our daughter about the old magic, sharing stories of the queens who came before. And if it's a boy, Marcus, after both our fathers. Your father who raised you to be an honourable leader, and mine who died protecting what he loved most." Her voice carried the weight of love and loss intertwined, the bittersweet knowledge that their child would grow up knowing their grandparents only through stories and cherished memories. Elder Mira had predicted that the royal bloodline would manifest early in their heir, possibly even before birth. Already, Lyra could feel the child responding to strong emotions through the mate bond, their tiny heart beating in rhythm with her own when she was happy or excited. The baby's wolf was already present, she was certain, a bright spark of awareness that carried both the silver fire of the Silver Moon bloodline and the storm strength of the Stormwind heritage. "The pack is asking when they can formally meet their future leader," Darius said, amusement colouring his voice. "I've had to post guards at the nursery door to keep the gift-bearers from filling it completely. Every family wants to present something for the royal heir." It was a problem Lyra had never imagined having. Too much love and attention rather than too little. The pack's excitement about their future ruler was genuine and overwhelming, a stark contrast to the indifference and cruelty that had defined her own childhood. After the birth blessing ceremony, she decided, when the child is strong enough to meet their people properly, Elder Mira can perform the ancient rituals, the ones that haven't been seen in this pack since I was born. The birth blessing would formally introduce their heir to the supernatural forces that shaped their world, calling down the protection of the moon goddess and the ancient spirits who watched over royal bloodlines. It would be a celebration 20 years in the making, the restoration of traditions that had been lost when the legitimate rulers were murdered. "Speaking of Elder Mira," Darius said, "she wanted to speak with you about the child's training. Apparently, royal gifts manifesting this early means special preparation will be needed from infancy." Lyra nodded, unsurprised by the elder's foresight. Her own powers had been suppressed by necessity, but their child would grow up learning to control and channel abilities that most wolves only dreamed of possessing. Truth-sensing, enhanced healing, the supernatural strength that came from bloodlines blessed by the goddess herself, all of it would be their birthright. "No suppression spells," she said firmly, the decision she had made months ago. "No matter how dangerous it might seem, no matter what threats arise, our child will never have their true nature hidden from them the way mine was hidden from me." "Agreed," Darius said immediately. "We'll face whatever challenges come from raising a child with fully awakened royal gifts. Together." The word that had become their foundation, their promise to each other and their pack. Together they had survived political machinations and assassination attempts. Together they had exposed 20 years of lies and restored justice to their people. Together they would raise the heir who would carry both their bloodlines into a future bright with possibility. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting their palace in shades of gold and silver, Lyra reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago she had been nobody, a servant scrubbing floors and accepting abuse as her natural lot. She had believed herself broken, worthless, fundamentally flawed in ways that could never be repaired. How wrong she had been. The mate bond pulsed between them with warm contentment as Darius's wolf responded to her emotional state. Through their connection, she felt his own wonder at the path that had led them here. An alpha king who had nearly chosen political duty over the call of his heart, who had almost let others decide his fate rather than following the wisdom of his own wolf. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, the question that sometimes surfaced during her most vulnerable moments. "Everything you gave up to choose me? The political alliances, the easy path, the future that everyone expected you to have?" Darius turned her in his arms so she faced him, his storm-grey eyes intense with the love that had defied every obstacle placed in their path. "The only thing I regret," he said, his voice carrying absolute truth, "is that I didn't trust my wolf's choice from the very beginning, that I wasted even a moment denying what we both knew was right." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of the promise that had sustained them through every trial. When they broke apart, Lyra felt the child within her respond to the spike of joy and love that flowed through the mate bond, a flutter of movement that spoke of life eager to join the world. "They're going to be so loved," she whispered, her hand moving to cover the place where their heir grew. "So wanted, so cherished, they'll never doubt their worth or question their place in the world." "They'll grow up knowing exactly who they are," Darius agreed, his own hand joining hers. The child of two rulers who chose love over convenience, truth over politics, and each other over everything else, the world tried to offer them. As they stood together on the balcony that overlooked the packlands they ruled with wisdom and compassion, Queen Lyra Silvermoon understood that her transformation was complete. The frightened servant girl who had believed herself worthless was truly gone, replaced by a leader who had learned that worth wasn't determined by birth or bloodline or the opinions of others. It came from within, from the courage to be who you truly were, regardless of what the world tried to make you believe. She had been born a princess, raised as a servant, awakened as a queen, and fulfilled as a mate and mother. But most importantly, she had learned to see herself as the goddess had always seen her, not as broken or defective or less than, but as exactly what she was meant to be. "I love you," she said to the man who had chosen her over duty, who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "I love you too," Darius replied, and sealed the promise with another kiss that tasted of starlight and silver fire and the ancient magic that bound them together for all eternity. Their child kicked strongly in response to the surge of love that flowed between them, and Lyra laughed with pure joy at the evidence of the life they had created together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to serve the pack that had finally found its way home. But today, in this moment, standing on the balcony of the palace that had been restored to its rightful owners, Queen Lyra Silvermoon was exactly where she belonged, crowned and mated and carrying the future within her, surrounded by the love that had made all of it possible. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer worthless. She was no longer nobody. She was home. The morning of the bonding ceremony arrived with cruel efficiency, painted in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to mock Lyra's grey existence. She had barely slept, her dreams haunted by ice-blue eyes and crystalline laughter, by the weight of expectations that would never include her and promises that would never be hers to claim. The ceremonial grounds had been transformed overnight into something magnificent and terrible. Banners in the colours of a dozen different packs fluttered from towering poles, each one representing bloodlines that stretched back through centuries of power and conquest. The stone amphitheatre gleamed under the morning sun, every trace of yesterday's blood scrubbed away by her own aching hands. At the centre of it all, the Alpha's throne waited like a dark promise, its silver inlays catching light and throwing it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lyra moved through her morning duties with mechanical precision, refilling wine goblets and arranging platters of food that she would never be invited to taste. The pack members who noticed her at all did so with the casual indifference reserved for furniture, stepping around her as if she were simply another part of the scenery, which she supposed she was. The first sign of his arrival was the sudden shift in the air itself. Every conversation died at once, as if someone had cast a spell of silence over the gathered wolves. The very atmosphere seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that made the hair on Lyra's arms stand on end. Her wolf, dormant for so long that she sometimes forgot it existed, stirred restlessly inside her chest like something waking from a long sleep. Then she felt it. A presence so overwhelming, so fundamentally dominant, that every instinct she possessed screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat, to acknowledge a power that dwarfed anything she had ever encountered. Alpha King Darius had arrived. He entered the ceremonial grounds like a storm given human form, his massive frame cutting through the assembled pack with predatory grace. Everything about him spoke of barely leashed violence and absolute authority. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, falling in waves that caught the light like black silk. His eyes were the colour of winter storms, grey and dangerous and completely merciless. When he moved, it was with the fluid precision of a creature that had never known defeat, never questioned its right to take whatever it desired. But it was the wolf at his side that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. Fenrir was legend made flesh, a creature of nightmare and myth that had earned its reputation in battles that bards still sang about in hushed voices. The massive black wolf stood nearly as tall as a man's waist, its coat so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Scars marked its muzzle and flanks, testament to countless fights where it had emerged victorious. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice pitched to carry across the amphitheatre while maintaining the perfect balance of respect and confidence. "Our pack is honoured by your presence. I am Lady Celeste of the Silver Moon bloodline, daughter of Alpha Marcus, and heir to territories that stretch from the Crystal Lake to the Northern Ridge." Darius acknowledged her words with a slight nod, but his attention seemed somehow distant, as if his mind was occupied with matters more pressing than political formalities. His wolf, Fenrir, showed none of the calm dignity expected at such a ceremony. Instead, the massive creature appeared restless, its head turning constantly as if searching for something in the crowd. "Lady Celeste," Darius replied, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made lesser wolves instinctively bare their throats. "Your reputation precedes you. The alliance between our packs will bring stability to the northern territories." It should have been a moment of triumph for Celeste, the formal acknowledgement she had been working toward her entire life. But Lyra, watching from her position near the serving tables, noticed the way Darius's eyes kept scanning the crowd, the way his own wolf seemed to stir restlessly beneath his human skin. The ceremony began with traditional pack rituals that had been performed for centuries. Elder Matthias, his voice carrying the weight of decades, recited the ancient words that would bind not just two individuals, but entire bloodlines. The gathered nobles listened with rapt attention, understanding that they were witnessing history in the making. But something was wrong. Fenrir had begun to pace, his massive paws silent on the stone, but his agitation growing more obvious with each passing moment. The wolf's amber eyes swept the crowd again and again, seeking something that apparently remained frustratingly out of reach. Several times Darius placed a firm hand on his companion's head, attempting to restore calm, but the gesture seemed to have little effect. Lyra tried to make herself smaller, pressing closer to the stone wall behind the serving area. Her own wolf was becoming increasingly restless, responding to whatever energy was affecting the Alpha King's legendary companion. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, her normally quiet and submissive wolf suddenly alert and focused in a way that made her chest tight with anxiety. The formal presentations continued, each noble family stepping forward to offer their respects and display their daughters for consideration. Though everyone knew the choice had already been made, tradition demanded the full ceremony. Celeste stood radiant and confident at the centre of it all, accepting congratulations from other nobles as if her selection was already confirmed. Which it was. Had to be. Lyra was nobody. She was nothing. She was a servant whose broken wolf marked her as fundamentally unworthy of notice, let alone consideration. The very idea that she could be anything else was so absurd that even thinking it felt like a betrayal of the natural order. But her wolf wouldn't be still. The ceremony reached its crescendo as Elder Matthias called for the final blessing, the moment when Darius would formally acknowledge his chosen mate before the assembled packs. Celeste stepped forward with fluid grace, her silver dress catching the light like captured starlight, her perfect smile radiating confidence and triumph. That's when Fenrir's head snapped toward the serving area with laser focus. The massive wolf had found whatever it had been searching for, and the sudden intensity of its attention made every other wolf in the amphitheatre fall silent. Darius followed his companion's gaze, and Lyra felt the weight of the Alpha King's stare fall on her like a physical blow. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The assembled pack held its collective breath as Darius took a step toward the serving area. His storm-grey eyes locked on the small figure pressed against the stone wall. Fenrir moved with him, no longer restless but focused with the kind of predatory intensity that had made him legend. "What is your name?" Darius asked, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent amphitheatre. Lyra's mouth went dry. Every eye in the place was on her now, hundreds of gazes boring into her like physical weight. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "Lyra, your Majesty," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Something shifted in Darius's expression, a flicker of recognition that made no sense. His wolf, Fenrir, took another step forward, and Lyra's own wolf responded with a surge of awareness that nearly buckled her knees. The mate bond. The impossible, unthinkable, catastrophic mate bond that was trying to snap into place between an alpha king and a servant girl whose wolf was too broken to even properly submit. "No," Lyra whispered, the word torn from her lips before she could stop it. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. She was nobody, nothing, a mistake that shouldn't even exist. But Fenrir was still moving toward her, and with each step the golden threads of connection grew stronger, more undeniable. Around them, the pack watched in frozen shock as their world tilted on its axis. Darius reached for his wolf, his voice carrying a note of command that had never been disobeyed. "Fenrir, heel." For the first time in living memory, the legendary wolf ignored its master completely. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, the entire ceremonial ground held its breath. The legendary Fenrir, who had never disobeyed a direct command, stood frozen between his master's will and something far more ancient and undeniable. His massive head remained turned toward Lyra, amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate with unspoken power. Darius's jaw tightened, storm-grey eyes flashing with a combination of confusion and growing alarm. In all their years together, through countless battles and ceremonies, his wolf had been an extension of his own will. Never had Fenrir shown even a moment's hesitation in following a command. "Fenrir," he repeated, his voice carrying the full weight of alpha authority that had brought entire packs to their knees. "Return to my side, now." The great wolf's ears flicked back briefly, acknowledgement that he had heard, but his paws remained planted on the stone, his attention unwavering from the small figure pressed against the serving wall. A low whine escaped his throat, so soft that only those closest could hear it, but the sound carried a note of desperate longing that made several of the watching nobles shift uncomfortably. Lady Celeste's perfect composure finally showed its first crack. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice still melodious but edged with the faintest hint of strain. "Perhaps your wolf is simply overwhelmed by the ceremony. Such grand occasions can affect even the strongest among us." But Darius wasn't listening to her diplomatic explanation. His eyes had found Lyra's across the amphitheatre, and in that moment of connection, something fundamental shifted in the fabric of the world. The mate bond, dormant and suppressed for so long, suddenly roared to life with the force of a dam bursting. Lyra gasped, the sound torn from her throat as golden fire raced through her veins. Every nerve ending in her body came alive at once, singing with an awareness so profound it was almost painful. Her wolf, quiet and grey and supposedly broken, surged forward within her consciousness with a strength that made her stagger. "Mate!" The word echoed in her head, and she did not know if it came from her wolf or from the ancient presence still examining her, or from him. Around them, the pack began to murmur as they witnessed something unprecedented. The Alpha King stood frozen, his legendary control cracking as his own wolf fought against the bonds of human form. Power radiated from him in waves, but it was no longer entirely his own. The mate bond was pulling at him with invisible golden threads, demanding acknowledgement of a truth that defied every social convention and political necessity. Elder Matthias, who had officiated more bonding ceremonies than any living wolf, took an uncertain step forward. In his ancient eyes was a recognition that made Lyra's blood turn to ice. He knew what was happening, even if he couldn't understand how or why. "Your Majesty," the elder began carefully, his weathered voice carrying across the suddenly electric air. "Perhaps we should—" He never finished the sentence. Fenrir moved. The massive black wolf broke from his frozen stance with fluid grace, crossing the amphitheatre floor in long, purposeful strides. Pack members scrambled out of his path, some dropping to the ground in instinctive submission as the legendary creature passed within inches of them. But Fenrir's attention was focused entirely on his destination, on her. Lyra watched in stunned disbelief as the wolf that had never bowed to anyone, that had torn through enemy lines and earned a reputation in blood and fury, came to a stop directly in front of her. For a moment, those ancient amber eyes studied her face with an intelligence that was both wild and profoundly wise. Then, with infinite gentleness, the great wolf lowered himself to the ground and rested his massive head against her legs. The amphitheatre exploded into chaos. "Impossible!" someone breathed, the word cutting through the sudden cacophony of shocked voices. "The servant girl, how can this be the mate bond with her?" Lady Celeste's composure shattered completely. "This is some kind of trick," she declared, her musical voice rising to a near shriek. "She's done something to bewitch them both. It's the only explanation. Look at her, she's nothing, nobody." But her protests were lost in the growing tumult as the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in. The Alpha King's wolf had chosen, not the perfect noble daughter with her pristine bloodline and political connections, not the woman who had been groomed from birth for this moment. The wolf had chosen a servant, a girl with a broken wolf and no family name to speak of, a nobody who scrubbed blood from stones and faded into backgrounds. Lyra's hands shook as she stared down at Fenrir's great head, resting trustingly against her legs. The wolf's presence was warm and solid and impossible, and through the mate bond she could feel his absolute certainty. There was no confusion in him, no doubt about what he had found, only recognition and fierce, protective love. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, Darius began walking toward them. Each step was deliberate and measured, but Lyra could see the storm raging behind his controlled exterior. His own wolf was clawing at him from within, demanding that he claim what belonged to them both. The crowd parted before him like grass before wind, nobles and servants alike shrinking back from the raw power radiating from their Alpha King. When he reached the place where his wolf lay contentedly against Lyra's legs, he stopped, his storm-grey eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. "What are you?" he asked, the same words he had spoken yesterday, but carrying entirely different weight now. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was a man confronting the impossible and trying to understand how his entire world had shifted in the space of a heartbeat. Lyra opened her mouth to give him the same answer she had given everyone else her entire life, that she was nothing, nobody, a mistake that shouldn't even exist. But the words wouldn't come. Her wolf, strengthened by the bond connection, pushed forward with sudden fierce pride. "I don't know," she whispered instead, and the honesty of it rang like a bell in the charged air between them. Darius reached out slowly, as if she might bolt like a frightened deer. When his fingers touched her cheek, the contact sent lightning through every nerve in her body. The mate bond flared between them, visible to everyone watching as a golden glow that seemed to emanate from their very skin. "Mine," he breathed, the word torn from somewhere deep in his chest. It wasn't a question or a decision. It was simple recognition of a truth that transcended politics and social hierarchies and careful plans. "No!" Lady Celeste's voice cracked like a whip across the amphitheatre. "This is madness. You can't seriously consider binding yourself to a servant when our alliance—" "The wolf has chosen." Elder Matthias's voice cut through her protests with the weight of absolute authority. The ancient wolf moved closer, his eyes fixed on the golden light that still flickered around Darius and Lyra. In all my years, I have never seen such a clear manifestation of the mate bond. This is not chance or trickery, Lady Celeste. This is destiny. The words hung in the air like a pronouncement of fate, impossible to argue with or deny. Around them, the pack watched in stunned silence as everything they thought they knew about bloodlines and breeding and political necessity crumbled like sand. Lyra stared up into Darius's storm-grey eyes and saw her own wonder reflected there. The mate bond hummed between them, strong and true and undeniable. She was still nobody, still a servant with a supposedly broken wolf. But she was also his mate, chosen by forces far older and more powerful than any human convention. "What happens now?" she whispered, because she truly didn't know. The world she had known, where she understood her place and her limitations, had just been torn apart and rebuilt around her. Darius's thumb traced across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness, his touch sending new sparks through the bond that connected them. "Now," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent amphitheatre, "everything changes." Around them, the pack held its collective breath as they witnessed the birth of something unprecedented. An alpha king and his mate, bound by a force that cared nothing for politics or propriety or carefully laid plans. The ceremony they had come to witness was over, but the story that would reshape the supernatural world was just beginning. The hours that followed the impossible recognition passed in a blur of chaos and whispered conversations that died the moment Lyra appeared. Word had spread through the pack like wildfire. The Alpha King's wolf had chosen a servant, and the very foundations of their social order had cracked under the weight of supernatural truth. Lyra found herself confined to the servant quarters, officially for her own protection, but practically to keep her away from the political storm raging in the main compound. Through the thin walls, she could hear fragments of heated arguments between the pack elders, voices rising and falling in urgent debate about bloodlines and alliances and the catastrophic implications of what everyone had witnessed. The mate bond ached inside her chest like a physical wound. Every moment apart from Darius felt wrong, as if she were missing some essential part of herself. Her wolf, no longer quiet and submissive, paced restlessly within her consciousness, whining for the connection that had been severed by political necessity. A sharp knock on her door made her jump. Beta Senna entered without waiting for permission, her usually perfect composure replaced by barely contained fury. "Pack your things," she commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're being relocated to the outer dormitories until this situation can be resolved." "What situation?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. Her very existence had become a problem that needed solving, a complication that threatened carefully laid plans and profitable alliances. Senna's laugh was bitter. "Don't play innocent with me, girl. Whatever trick you used to bewitch the Alpha King's wolf, it won't work for long. The pack elders are meeting as we speak to determine how to break this aberration." The word hit like a physical blow. Aberration. As if the mate bond itself were something unnatural, something that could be dismissed and discarded when it became inconvenient. Lyra's wolf snarled within her, a flash of defiance that surprised them both with its intensity. "It wasn't a trick," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't even understand what happened." "Of course you don't," Senna sneered. "You're nothing but a servant with delusions of grandeur. Did you really think the Alpha King would choose you over Lady Celeste? That your broken wolf could compete with centuries of noble breeding?" Before Lyra could respond, the door burst open again. Lady Celeste herself stood in the doorway, her perfect features twisted with a rage that transformed her beauty into something cold and terrible. Gone was the gracious noblewoman from the ceremony. In her place stood a woman whose entire future had been stolen by an impossible twist of fate. "Leave us," she commanded Senna, who immediately retreated with a bow. When they were alone, Celeste stepped into the small room and closed the door behind her with deliberate care. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "The alliance between our packs was years in the making, territories negotiated, trade agreements signed, bloodline contracts sealed in sacred oaths, and you think you can destroy all of that because some wolf made a mistake." Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing as she faced the fury of a woman whose entire identity had been built around becoming the Alpha King's mate. "I didn't do anything. I didn't ask for this." "No, you just stood there and let it happen," Celeste spat. "You could have rejected the bond. You could have told his wolf to choose properly, but instead you basked in the attention like the pathetic little nobody you are." The cruelty in her words was nothing compared to the promise in her ice-blue eyes. This wasn't just anger over a disrupted ceremony. This was hatred, pure and simple, directed at someone who had dared to reach above her station. "Listen to me very carefully," Celeste continued, moving closer until Lyra could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something sharper. Fear, maybe, or desperation. "This farce ends now. The Alpha King will come to his senses once he's away from whatever spell you've cast. He'll realise that duty and honour matter more than the whims of a confused animal." "The mate bond isn't a spell," Lyra whispered, surprised by her own courage in contradicting someone so far above her station. Celeste's hand moved faster than thought, the slap echoing through the small room like a gunshot. Lyra's cheek blazed with pain, but she didn't cry out. Years of abuse had taught her that showing pain only encouraged more of it. "The mate bond," Celeste said with icy precision, "is a political inconvenience that will be corrected. And if you have any sense of self-preservation, you'll make that correction easy for everyone involved. Reject him publicly. Tell him you were mistaken, that you're not worthy, because if you don't—" She let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. Lyra nodded quickly, desperately, anything to make this nightmare end. "Good," Celeste smiled, the expression somehow more frightening than her anger had been. "I'm glad we understand each other." After she left, Lyra sank onto her narrow bed and buried her face in her hands. Through the bond, she could feel Darius somewhere in the compound, his own turmoil mixing with hers in a cocktail of confusion and pain. He was fighting something, his advisors probably, or his own sense of duty warring against the supernatural pull that connected them. The door opened again, and for a moment Lyra's heart leaped with hope. But it wasn't Darius who entered. It was one of the younger servants, a girl named Mari, who had always been kind to her. "The pack elders want to see you," Mari whispered, her eyes wide with fear and sympathy. "They're meeting in the great hall. They say they're going to determine if the bond is legitimate." Lyra felt her stomach drop. A formal inquiry meant testimony, examination, possibly even magical tests that could determine the truth of what had happened. But it also meant facing a room full of powerful wolves who had already decided she was an obstacle to be removed. She followed Mari through corridors that suddenly felt alien and hostile. Pack members she had served for years looked at her with mixtures of curiosity, disgust, and barely concealed anger. Some whispered as she passed, their words sharp and cutting. "Fraud! Pretender! How dare she!" The great hall had been transformed into a tribunal, with the pack elders seated at a curved table that dominated the far end of the room. Alpha King Darius sat beside them, his face a mask of controlled neutrality that revealed nothing of his inner turmoil. But through the bond, Lyra could feel the storm raging within him, duty and desire locked in brutal conflict. Elder Matthias rose as she entered, his ancient eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to hide. When he spoke, his voice carried throughout the hall with ceremonial weight. "Lyra of no family name, you stand accused of using unnatural means to interfere with the sacred mate bond. How do you answer these charges?" The words echoed in the sudden silence. Around the hall dozens of eyes watched her, waiting to see how a servant would dare defend herself against such accusations. At the head table, Darius's knuckles were white where his hands gripped the arms of his chair. "I don't understand the charges," Lyra said, her voice small but clear in the vast space. "I didn't do anything except exist." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd, some disapproving, others surprised by her directness. Elder Matthias nodded slightly, as if her answer confirmed something he had suspected. "The mate bond is sacred," he continued. "It cannot be forced or faked or manufactured through trickery. If what occurred at the ceremony was genuine, then it will withstand examination. If it was not—" He let the implication hang in the air. What he didn't say was what everyone in the room already knew. If the bond were declared false, Lyra would face punishment that would make her current suffering seem merciful, and Darius would be free to honour his political obligations by choosing Celeste. Through the bond, she felt his anguish spike. The Alpha King torn between everything he had been taught about duty and honour, and the undeniable pull of a connection that defied explanation. His wolf was fighting him, she realised, demanding that he stand and claim what belonged to them both. But he remained seated, silent, letting others determine their fate. "Very well," Elder Matthias said. "Let the examination begin." The examination never came. Before Elder Matthias could begin whatever tests he had planned, Lyra collapsed. The bond pain that had been building since the moment Darius denied their connection finally overwhelmed her body's ability to endure it. She hit the stone floor of the great hall like a broken doll, her vision going white as agony lanced through every nerve. Through their connection, she felt Darius surge to his feet, his careful control shattering as his mate's pain became his own. But before he could reach her, Elder Matthias was there, his ancient hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her sit up. "Enough," the elder said, his voice carrying an authority that made even the Alpha King pause. "This child is dying from bond rejection. Whatever political games you wish to play, they end now." Strong arms lifted Lyra from the floor, and she found herself cradled against a chest that smelled of pine forests and winter storms. Darius had broken ranks, his duty finally overridden by the instinct to protect his mate. Through her fading consciousness, she heard his voice, rough with emotion. "I've got you," he whispered against her hair. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The next thing she knew, she was waking in unfamiliar surroundings. Instead of her cramped servants' quarters, she found herself in a room that spoke of ancient power and carefully guarded secrets. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating tapestries that depicted wolves running beneath silver skies. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and old magic. "You're in the sacred grove," a gentle voice said from the shadows. Elder Mira emerged into the moonlight, her silver hair gleaming like starlight. Unlike the other pack elders, she had always been kind to Lyra, offering small smiles and extra food when the others weren't watching. "You've been sleeping for 2 days." 2 days. Lyra struggled to sit up, her body still aching from the bond rejection. "Where is—" "The Alpha King has been beside himself," Elder Mira said, settling into a chair beside the bed with fluid grace that belied her advanced age. "He's been pacing outside like a caged wolf ever since he brought you here. I finally had to threaten him with my walking stick to make him give you space to heal." The image of the powerful Alpha King being chased away by an elderly woman with a walking stick might have been amusing under different circumstances, but Lyra could feel the echo of his distress through their connection, his wolf clawing at him with the need to ensure her safety. "Elder Mira," she began, but the older woman held up a hand. "Before you ask your questions, child, you need to understand something. The bond between you and the Alpha King is not an aberration or a mistake. It is exactly what it appears to be, the recognition of true mates by forces older than civilization itself." Elder Mira's eyes, ancient and wise, studied Lyra's face with unsettling intensity. The question is not whether the bond is real. The question is why it was able to manifest at all. I don't understand. Elder Mira rose from her chair and moved to an ornate chest in the corner of the room. When she returned, she carried something wrapped in midnight blue silk. Her movements were reverent, as if she handled something sacred. "Tell me, child, what do you know of your parents?" The question hit like a physical blow. "Nothing," Lyra whispered. "I was found as a baby, abandoned at the pack borders. No family, no name, no bloodline worth claiming." Yes, that's the story everyone knows, the story that was carefully crafted to keep you safe. Elder Mira's fingers worked at the silk wrapping with deliberate care. But stories, like spells, can be broken when the time is right. The silk fell away, revealing a necklace that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. The pendant was silver, worked into the shape of a wolf's head, its eyes set with sapphires that seemed to glow with inner light. Ancient runes covered its surface, their meaning lost to time, but their power unmistakable. "This belonged to your mother," Elder Mira said softly. "Queen Selene of the Silver Moon Pack, last of the ancient royal bloodline." The words hung in the air like an impossible dream. Queen, royal bloodline, your mother. None of it made sense, couldn't make sense, because Lyra was nobody, nothing, a servant whose wolf was too broken to matter. "That's impossible," she breathed. "I'm nobody. My wolf is grey, defective." "Your wolf is silver," Elder Mira corrected gently. "The mark of ancient royalty, hidden beneath a suppression spell so powerful it has fooled everyone, including you, for 20 years. Silver. The word echoed in Lyra's mind like a bell, and suddenly her wolf was there, pushing forward with a strength she had never felt before. Not grey, not broken, not defective. Silver, like moonlight on water, like starlight made manifest. "The suppression spell was cast the night your parents died," Elder Mira continued, her voice heavy with old grief. "Queen Selene and King Marcus were murdered by wolves who coveted their power, who believed that bloodlines could be stolen through violence. You were just a baby, hidden away while assassins stalked through the palace halls." Images flashed through Lyra's mind, fragments of dreams she had always dismissed as imagination. A woman with silver hair singing lullabies in a voice like wind chimes. A man with kind eyes lifting her toward the moon. The sound of breaking glass and screams in the night. "I brought you here to this pack, and I cast the strongest suppression spell I knew," Elder Mira said. "I made you grey, made you forgettable, made you invisible. I gave you a false history of abandonment because the truth would have gotten you killed." "Who?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Who killed them?" Elder Mira's expression grew grim. "Marcus Silverclaw and his family. They called themselves patriots, claimed they were protecting the pack from weak leadership. In reality, they wanted power and were willing to commit any atrocity to claim it. Marcus Silverclaw." Lyra's blood turned to ice as recognition dawned. Lady Celeste's father. "Yes, the woman who was meant to become Alpha King's mate is the daughter of your parents' murderer. The alliance between the packs wasn't just political. It was the completion of a conspiracy 20 years in the making." The revelation hit like lightning, illuminating connections that had been hidden in shadow. Celeste's hatred wasn't just about a disrupted ceremony. It was about a bloodline she thought she had helped eliminate, threatening to reclaim its rightful place. "The suppression spell is breaking," Elder Mira continued. "The mate bond with an alpha as powerful as Darius has cracked the magical barriers I placed around your true self. Soon everyone will be able to see what you really are." As if summoned by her words, power stirred within Lyra's chest. Her wolf, no longer muted and grey, began to push against the magical chains that had bound her for so long. She could feel silver fire in her veins, ancient strength that had been waiting her entire life to be unleashed. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had learned. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know how to use power I never knew I had." Elder Mira reached out and took her hands, her grip warm and reassuring. "You learn, child, just as your parents had to learn, just as every ruler before them learned. But first you must decide whether you're ready to reclaim what was stolen from you." Through the bond, Lyra could feel Darius's presence like a beacon in the darkness. He was close, his own wolf restless and protective, waiting for permission to come to her. The mate bond thrummed between them, no longer painful, but strong and true and undeniable. "If I do this," Lyra said slowly, "if I become who you say I am, there's no going back." "There was never any going back," Elder Mira replied. "The moment the Alpha King's wolf recognized you, your destiny was set in motion. The only choice now is whether you meet it as a frightened servant or as the queen you were born to be." Lyra looked down at the silver pendant in her hands, feeling the weight of generations of royal blood and ancient responsibility. Her parents had died for this legacy. She had lived 20 years in hiding because of it, and now the time for hiding was over. "Teach me," she said, her voice steady for the first time since the bonding ceremony. "Teach me how to be what I'm supposed to be." Elder Mira smiled, and in her ancient eyes was the fierce pride of a guardian who had protected a secret for 2 decades. "We begin tonight, Your Majesty. We begin with teaching you how to let your true wolf free." The training began in the deepest hour of night, when the moon hung full and silver overhead like a beacon calling to the royal blood that flowed through Lyra's veins. Elder Mira led her deeper into the sacred grove, past ancient trees whose bark bore runes older than memory, to a clearing where moonlight pooled like liquid starlight. "Your suppression spell was built in layers," the elder explained, her voice hushed with reverence for the old magic. 20 years of careful construction, each thread woven to hide not just your appearance, but your very essence. Breaking it safely will take time." But even as she spoke, Lyra could feel the magical bonds weakening. The mate connection with Darius had cracked the first barriers, and each hour that passed saw more of her true self bleeding through. Her senses were sharper, her hearing more acute. When she moved, there was a grace that hadn't been there before, a fluidity that spoke of predatory power held in careful check. "Close your eyes," Elder Mira instructed. "Reach for your wolf, but don't try to force the change. Simply ask her to show herself." Lyra had spent years trying to connect with her supposedly broken wolf, always meeting silence or weak, grey stirrings that reinforced her belief that she was fundamentally flawed. But now, when she reached inward with tentative hope, she found something magnificent waiting for her. Her wolf rose to meet her consciousness with liquid silver grace, no longer muted or subdued. Where there had once been grey fur, now there was silver that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Eyes that had been dull and lifeless now blazed like sapphires, ancient and wise and filled with the accumulated power of generations of royal blood. "Beautiful," Elder Mira breathed, and Lyra realized she was partially shifted, silver fur covering her arms, her fingernails extended into elegant claws. "Your mother would be so proud." The partial shift felt natural in a way her previous attempts never had. Instead of fighting her human form, her wolf seemed content to blend the two, creating something that was both more and less than either alone. Power hummed beneath her skin, controlled and purposeful. "The royal bloodline carries gifts beyond simple strength," Elder Mira explained as Lyra marvelled at her transformed hands. "Enhanced healing, supernatural speed, and most importantly, the ability to sense truth and deception in others. Your parents used that gift to root out corruption and betrayal in their court." Betrayal. The word brought back the revelation about Celeste's family, and Lyra's newly awakened wolf snarled softly. Her parents' murderers had not only escaped justice, They had thrived, positioning themselves to complete their conquest through political alliance. "They don't know you remember," Eldamira said, reading her expression with the wisdom of decades. The suppression spell was meant to hide memories as well as power, but now that it's breaking, images flashed through Lyra's mind with increasing clarity, her mother's silver hair catching moonlight as she sang ancient lullabies, her father's strong hands lifting her toward the stars while he told her stories of the great wolves who had ruled before them. The sound of her mother's scream cut short, the smell of blood and fear that had sent baby Lyra into terrified silence. "I remember them coming," she whispered, her voice rough with the weight of recovered memory. "Men with dark fur and darker hearts. My mother tried to hide me, but they found us anyway." "Marcus Silverclaw led them personally," Eldamira confirmed, her ancient voice heavy with old grief. "He wanted to ensure there were no survivors who could challenge his claim later. When I arrived with the guard reinforcements, it was already too late. Your parents were dead, and you were the only thing standing between him and complete victory." The clearing fell silent except for the whisper of wind through ancient leaves. Lyra let the memories settle, feeling the weight of her heritage like a mantle across her shoulders. She had been born to rule, bred for power and responsibility, only to spend 20 years scrubbing floors and accepting abuse from the very wolves who had stolen her birthright. "The Alpha King," she said suddenly, remembering Darius's torment through their bond connection. "He's fighting this, fighting us." Eldamira nodded gravely. "His wolf knows the truth, even if his human mind struggles to accept it. An alpha of his power can sense royal blood, even through suppression spells. That's why Fenrir chose you so decisively. He recognized what you are on a level deeper than conscious thought." As if summoned by their words, Lyra felt Darius's presence approaching through the forest. The mate bond stretched between them like a golden thread, and she could sense his internal struggle as he drew closer. His duty warred with his desire, his wolf clawing at him to claim what belonged to them, while his human responsibilities demanded he honour political commitments. "He's coming," she breathed. "Let him come," Eldamira said. "It's time he learned the truth about his mate." Darius emerged from the tree line like a creature of shadow and starlight, his storm-grey eyes finding her immediately across the moonlit clearing. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, but Lyra could see the tension in every line of his body, the barely leashed power that spoke of a man at war with himself. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The mate bond pulled at both of them, demanding acknowledgement and completion despite the political chaos swirling around their connection. "Neither should you," Lyra replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The awakening power made her feel more confident, more centered than she had ever been. "But here we are." He took a step closer, and she could see the moment when his enhanced senses caught the change in her scent, the way her emerging power registered to his alpha instincts. His eyes widened as he took in her partial shift, the silver fur and glowing eyes that marked her as something far beyond a simple servant. "What are you?" The question that had haunted him since the bonding ceremony carried new weight now, asked not in confusion, but in growing recognition. Eldamira stepped forward, her ancient authority filling the clearing. "She is Queen Lyra Silvermoon, last heir of the royal bloodline, daughter of Queen Selene and King Marcus, who were murdered by traitors 20 years ago." The words hit Darius like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his own wolf surging forward as the implications crashed over him. Royal bloodline. Queen. The mate his wolf had chosen wasn't just acceptable, she outranked everyone, including him. "Impossible," he breathed. But even as he said it, Lyra could feel his certainty crumbling through their bond. His alpha instincts were screaming recognition now that the suppression spell had weakened enough to let her true nature show. "Your wolf knew," Lyra said softly, taking a step toward him. "From the moment you arrived, Fenrir recognized what I was. That's why he couldn't choose Celeste. That's why he came to me instead." Darius's hands clenched into fists as he struggled with the revelation. The alliance, the territories, everything we planned, was built on a lie, Eldamira finished. Marcus Silverclaw murdered the rightful rulers and has spent 20 years positioning his family to complete their conquest. The alliance you were meant to honour would have given them everything they killed for. Through the mate bond, Lyra felt the moment when Darius's world shifted entirely. The duty that had driven him since childhood, the political necessity that had made him deny their connection, all of it crumbled as he realised he had been manoeuvred by the very wolves who had destroyed her family. "My God," he whispered, and the anguish in his voice made her heart clench. "I almost gave them everything. I almost let them win." He crossed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. The mate bond flared between them, no longer painful but warm and golden and complete. When he looked into her eyes, she saw not just desire, but recognition, acceptance, and the fierce protectiveness of an alpha who had finally found his true mate. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm so sorry I made you doubt what we have. My wolf was right. He's been right all along." "I know," Lyra replied, her own hands coming up to cover his. "I can feel what you feel, remember? I know this has been torture for you too." For a moment they stood together in the moonlight, the mate bond humming between them like a bridge between 2 souls that had been separated by politics and lies and carefully constructed deceptions. But now the truth was emerging, and nothing would ever be the same. "What happens now?" Darius asked, and Lyra heard the question he wasn't asking. "How do we face the pack who will have to accept that their servant is actually their queen? How do we deal with the Silverclaw family who will fight to keep what they've stolen? How do we build a future from the wreckage of 20 years of lies?" "Now," Eldamira said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "you both learn who you're truly meant to be, together." The attack came at dawn, when the pack was stirring to life and Lyra was most vulnerable. She had returned to the servant quarters before sunrise, maintaining the pretense that nothing had changed while her world rebuilt itself around the truth of her heritage. The silver pendant lay hidden beneath her rough servant's dress, its weight a constant reminder of who she truly was. Her partially awakened powers hummed just beneath her skin, silver fire waiting to be unleashed. The breakfast tray arrived as it always did, carried by young Tom, a kitchen servant who had always been kind to her. But something was wrong. Her enhanced senses, sharpened by her emerging royal bloodline, caught the acrid scent of bitter almonds beneath the smell of fresh bread and honey. Poison. The realization hit her like ice water, and her newly awakened wolf snarled in recognition. Someone had finally moved beyond threats and social manipulation. Someone wanted her dead. "Tom," she said carefully, not wanting to frighten the boy who might be innocent, "who asked you to bring this to me?" The young servant's eyes darted away from hers, his scent spiking with fear and guilt. "I was just told to deliver it, miss, same as always." But his hands shook as he set the tray down, and Lyra's gift for sensing deception, one of the royal bloodline's ancient powers, flared to life. The boy was lying, probably coerced rather than willing, but lying nonetheless. "Who, Tom?" she asked again, her voice carrying a note of authority that hadn't been there a week ago. The command resonated with supernatural power, compelling honesty. "Lady Celeste," he whispered, tears streaming down his young face. "She said she'd have my sister dismissed from the kitchens if I didn't do exactly as she told me. I'm sorry, miss. I'm so sorry." Lyra's heart clenched, for the boy caught between loyalty and family survival, but her wolf was focused on the larger threat. Celeste had escalated from verbal warnings to attempted murder. The daughter of her parents' killer was now trying to complete what her father had started 20 years ago. "It's all right, Tom," she said gently, her anger carefully controlled. "You're not responsible for her choices, But I need you to tell me, what exactly did she ask you to do?" "Put the powder in your morning porridge," he said, producing a small vial from his pocket with shaking hands. "She said it would just make you sick, make you leave the pack. She said it wouldn't really hurt you." Lyra took the vial and examined its contents. Even through the glass she could smell the deadly nightshade and wolfsbane mixture that would have killed her within hours. Not sick, dead. "Tom, I need you to listen very carefully," she said, her voice taking on the commanding tone that was her birthright. "You're going to go back to the kitchens and tell them exactly what Lady Celeste asked you to do. Don't be afraid. I promise you and your sister will be protected. Can you do that for me?" The boy nodded quickly, relief and terror warring in his expression. After he fled, Lyra stared at the poisoned breakfast with growing fury. Celeste's father had murdered her parents with steel and claw. The daughter preferred poison in the darkness. The mate bond flared suddenly, carrying Darius's alarm and protective rage. He had felt her spike of adrenaline and fear, and she could sense him moving through the compound toward her with lethal purpose. Through their connection, she projected reassurance and her location, knowing he would come regardless of political consequences. He burst through her door like a force of nature, his alpha power filling the small room until it could barely contain him. When his storm-grey eyes found her unharmed, relief flooded the mate bond so powerfully it nearly buckled her knees. "What happened?" he demanded, taking in the untouched breakfast tray and her heightened state of alert. Lyra held up the vial of poison, watching his expression shift from relief to murderous fury in the span of a heartbeat. "Lady Celeste decided words weren't enough. She sent young Tom to poison my breakfast." The sound that escaped Darius was inhuman, a growl that came from his wolf and spoke of violence barely held in check. Power radiated from him in waves, and through the bond Lyra felt his iron control cracking under the weight of protective rage. "Where is she?" His voice was deceptively quiet, the kind of calm that preceded devastating storms. Probably in her chambers, pretending innocence. Lyra stood and moved to him, her hands finding his chest where she could feel his heart hammering with fury. "Darius, we need to be smart about this. If we act in anger—" "Smart?" He caught her hands in his grip gentle despite the violence thrumming through him. "She tried to murder you, my mate, the rightful queen of this pack. What part of that calls for measured response?" Through their connection, she could feel his wolf clawing to get free, demanding they hunt down the threat and eliminate it with tooth and claw. Part of her, the newly awakened silver wolf that remembered royal authority, agreed with that impulse. But the part that had survived 20 years as a servant knew the value of patience. "Because," she said, "if we're going to expose the full conspiracy, we need proof that goes beyond Tom's coerced testimony. Celeste won't confess under pressure. She'll claim innocence and throw the boy to save herself." Before Darius could respond, hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Elder Mira appeared in the doorway, her ancient eyes taking in the scene with immediate understanding. "The boy spoke to the kitchen staff," she said without preamble. "Word is spreading through the servant quarters that Lady Celeste tried to poison you, but she's already spinning her own version, claiming Tom was lying to get attention, that you're making wild accusations to distract from your inappropriate bond with the Alpha King." "Of course she is," Lyra said grimly. "Deny and deflect, make me look like the problem." "There's more," Elder Mira continued, her expression grave. "Beta Senna is calling for an immediate investigation. She's demanding you be confined pending a formal inquiry into your increasingly erratic behaviour and delusional claims about your supposed heritage." The trap was closing around them. Celeste had gambled on the poison working, but now that it had failed, she was activating every political connection to neutralise the threat Lyra represented. Accusation, investigation, confinement, all of it designed to isolate her from Darius and Elder Mira before the truth could spread. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," Darius said, his tactical mind already working through the implications. "If they get you confined before we can present evidence of your bloodline." "Then I disappear permanently," Lyra finished. "Another tragic accident, just like my parents." The mate bond pulsed between them, carrying shared determination and the fierce protectiveness that came from finding something worth fighting for. Through their connection, Lyra felt Darius making a decision that would reshape everything. "No," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha king who had finally chosen his side. "No more hiding, no more political games. If they want to move against you, they'll have to go through me." "Darius!" "You are my mate," he said, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness that contrasted sharply with the steel in his voice. "You are the rightful queen of this pack, and you are under my protection. Anyone who moves against you moves against me." The declaration sent shockwaves through the mate bond, carrying the weight of formal proclamation. He was throwing aside 20 years of careful political manoeuvring, risking everything for the truth of what they were together. "The pack will revolt," Eldamira warned. "Half of them still believe she's just a servant with delusions. They won't accept such a dramatic reversal without proof." "Then we give them proof," Darius said grimly. "It's time to end this charade once and for all." Through the bond, Lyra felt his resolve crystallizing into something unbreakable. Her Alpha King had finally chosen her over duty, truth over politics, and the mate bond over everything else. But she also felt his fear, not for himself but for her, knowing that the enemies arrayed against them would stop at nothing to preserve their stolen power. "Together," she said, echoing Eldamira's words from the night before. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Together," he agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of starlight and silver fire and the ancient power that ran in her royal blood. Outside her door, footsteps were approaching. Beta Senna and her supporters come to drag Lyra away for questioning that would end in another convenient death. But they would find something they hadn't expected, an Alpha King standing guard over his mate, and a hidden queen finally ready to reclaim her throne. The war for the pack's soul was about to begin. The formal challenge came at midday, delivered with all the ceremony and malice that ancient pack law demanded. Lady Celeste stood in the centre of the great hall, her golden hair gleaming under the torchlight, her ice-blue eyes blazing with righteous fury that she wore like armour. Around her, the assembled pack watched in tense silence as she raised her voice, in the ritual words that had not been spoken in generations. "I, Lady Celeste of the Silverclaw bloodline, invoke the ancient right of combat trial. I challenge the pretender who calls herself worthy of the Alpha King's bond. Let her face me in honest battle, and let the strongest claim what is rightfully hers." The words echoed through the hall like a death sentence. Pack law was absolute. No one could refuse a formal challenge, especially not when it involved questions of bloodline and mating rights. Elder Matthias, bound by traditions older than memory, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "The challenge is witnessed and binding," he announced, his weathered voice heavy with regret. "Combat will commence at sunset in the sacred ring. The challenged party has the right to choose weapons or natural form." Lyra stood beside Darius, feeling the mate bond thrumming with his barely contained fury. Through their connection, she sensed his desperate desire to intervene, to use his alpha authority to stop what was essentially a sanctioned execution. But even an Alpha King couldn't override pack law once the ritual words had been spoken. "I accept," Lyra said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "Natural form, wolf against wolf." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew her wolf was small, grey, supposedly defective. Against Celeste's pristine white wolf, bred for strength and trained for combat, it would be slaughter, which was exactly what Celeste was counting on. "So be it," Elder Matthias said gravely. "At sunset we witness trial by combat, May the goddess guide the worthy to victory." As the pack dispersed in excited whispers, Darius caught Lyra's arm, his grip gentle but desperate. "You don't have to do this," he said urgently. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," she replied, though her stomach clenched with fear. "If I refuse, I'm branded a coward and exiled. If I try to avoid it, she'll find another way to challenge my right to be here. This ends it, one way or another." Through the mate bond, she felt his anguish spike. He had just found his true mate, just learned she was the rightful queen, and now he might lose her to political manoeuvring and ancient laws. "Your wolf," he began, then stopped, knowing she understood his concern. Everyone had seen her supposed weakness, the grey creature that barely seemed to qualify as supernatural. "Is not what she appears to be," Elder Mira said, approaching them with purpose. "Come, we have hours before sunset and much to accomplish." The elder led them to the sacred grove where Lyra had begun her training, but this time the atmosphere was charged with urgency rather than mystical wonder. Ancient trees seemed to lean in, as if they too understood that everything hung in the balance of the coming fight. "The suppression spell," Elder Mira explained as she began laying out ritual items on a stone altar. "It must be completely broken before you face her, not gradually, not partially, completely." "Is that safe?" Darius asked, his protective instincts flaring at the thought of magical experimentation hours before mortal combat. "Safe?" Elder Mira laughed, but there was no humour in the sound. "Child, nothing about this situation is safe, but if Lyra faces Celeste with her power still suppressed, she dies. If we break the spell, she has a chance." The ritual required blood, moon water, and words in the old tongue that predated written language. As Elder Mira worked, Lyra felt the magical bindings that had defined her entire existence beginning to strain and crack. Power built inside her like pressure in a sealed vessel, demanding release. "It will hurt," the elder warned. 20 years of suppressed power breaking free all at once. Your body wasn't meant to handle that kind of sudden change." "Do it," Lyra said through gritted teeth. Through the mate bond, she drew strength from Darius's presence, his love and faith in her acting as an anchor in the storm of magical energy. Elder Mira spoke a final word in the ancient language, and the suppression spell shattered like glass. Pain lanced through every bone in Lyra's body as they cracked and reformed, as her spine elongated and her face pushed forward into a muzzle. She heard herself scream, but the sound came out as a howl, long and mournful and filled with 20 years of suppressed rage. Her human clothes tore away as her body expanded, muscles rippling with newfound strength. When the transformation completed, she stood on 4 legs that trembled with exhaustion and newfound power. But she was no longer the small grey wolf everyone expected. She was magnificent. Silver fur covered her from nose to tail tip, each hair seeming to capture and reflect moonlight even in the afternoon sun. She was larger than any female wolf had a right to be, rivaling the size of dominant males. Ancient runes appeared and disappeared in her fur like living tattoos, marking her as royalty descended from the first wolves. Her eyes blazed like sapphires touched by starlight. "My God," Darius breathed, and through the bond she felt his awe and fierce pride. This was his mate, his queen, revealed in all her supernatural glory. Lyra shifted back to human form, the change easier now that the barriers were gone. She stood naked and unashamed in the dappled sunlight, power radiating from her skin like heat from forge fire. "How do you feel?" Elder Mira asked, studying her with professional interest. "Like myself," Lyra said, and meant it. For the first time in her life, she felt complete, whole, connected to the power that was her birthright, like who I was always meant to be. The hours until sunset passed in intensive combat training. Elder Mira had not forgotten the warrior skills of her youth, and she pushed Lyra through exercises designed to familiarize her with her new strength and speed. The royal bloodline carried gifts beyond simple physical enhancement, supernatural reflexes, the ability to predict an opponent's moves, healing that could mend wounds in minutes rather than days. Celeste is a skilled fighter, the elder warned as they practiced. She's been training for combat since childhood, and her wolf is strong, but she has one critical weakness. What's that? She believes her own lies about your worthlessness. In her mind, she's facing a broken servant with delusions of grandeur. She won't be prepared for what you truly are. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the pack gathered in the sacred combat ring carved into the mountainside. The circular arena was ancient, its stones stained with the blood of countless challenges over the centuries. Torches blazed around the perimeter, casting dancing shadows that made the watching faces appear demonic. Lyra entered the ring to murmurs of surprise from those who hadn't seen her since the suppression spell broke. She moved with fluid grace that hadn't been there before, her head held high with an authority that made lesser wolves instinctively want to bare their throats. The silver pendant at her throat caught the torchlight, identifying her to any who knew the old bloodlines. Celeste entered from the opposite side, her white wolf form rippling with muscle and barely contained violence. She was beautiful and terrible, bred for war and trained for killing. When she saw Lyra's transformation, her lips pulled back in a snarl of fury and disbelief. Elder Matthias stood between them, his ancient voice carrying across the arena. "This combat is witnessed by the pack and blessed by the goddess. Fight with honour, fight to victory, let the worthy prevail." The two wolves circled each other slowly, each looking for weakness, for opportunity. Celeste moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight, her pale eyes fixed on Lyra with murderous intent. She attacked first, launching herself across the ring with explosive speed. Her jaws gaped wide, aiming for Lyra's throat in a killing strike meant to end the fight immediately. But Lyra wasn't there when the attack landed. Royal blood carried gifts that couldn't be taught or learned, only inherited. Lyra twisted aside at the last possible second, her supernatural reflexes allowing her to avoid death by mere inches. Celeste's momentum carried her past, and Lyra's claws raked across her opponent's flank in passing. First blood to the silver wolf. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps. No one had expected the servant girl to survive Celeste's opening attack, let alone draw first blood. Through the mate bond, Lyra felt Darius's fierce pride and barely restrained desire to howl his support. Celeste spun with fluid grace, her ice-blue eyes now blazing with real fury. The casual contempt was gone, replaced by the recognition that she faced a true opponent. She had expected slaughter. Instead, she found herself in an actual fight. They circled again, but the dynamic had changed. Celeste moved more carefully now, respecting the speed and skill she hadn't expected to find. When she attacked again, it was with calculated precision rather than overwhelming force. The battle that followed was brutal and beautiful, two magnificent wolves locked in mortal combat while the pack watched in stunned silence. Celeste had training and experience, but Lyra had raw power and the desperate strength of someone fighting for everything she held dear. They traded wounds, silver and white fur becoming stained with red as claws found their marks and fangs tore flesh. But gradually, inevitably, Lyra's superior healing began to tip the balance. Wounds that should have slowed her closed within minutes, while Celeste's injuries accumulated. The end came suddenly. Celeste, frustrated by her opponent's resilience, overcommitted to a lung attack that should have ended the fight. Lyra caught her opponent's throat in her jaws and bore her to the ground with irresistible force. For a moment they lay locked together, predator and prey, life and death balanced on the edge of decision. The pack held its collective breath, waiting to see if mercy or justice would prevail. Lyra could have killed her. Every instinct screamed for her to complete the victory, to eliminate the threat to her mate and her pack. Through the mate bond, she felt Darius's wolf howling for blood, demanding she finish what Celeste had started. Instead, she released her grip and stepped back, allowing her defeated opponent to live. Celeste lay gasping on the blood-stained stones, her white fur matted with gore, her ice-blue eyes filled with shock and defeated rage. Around them, the pack stared in amazement at the servant who had become a queen before their very eyes. Elder Matthias's voice cut through the silence like a blade. The challenge is decided. Victory to Lyra Silvermoon, rightful heir to the royal bloodline, true mate to Alpha King Darius. The formal words released something in the watching pack. One by one they dropped to their knees in submission, acknowledging the queen they had never expected to find. Even those who had tormented her for years bowed their heads before the silver wolf who had reclaimed her birthright through strength and mercy. Only then did Lyra shift back to human form, standing naked and magnificent in the centre of the arena. Blood streaked her skin from dozens of small wounds that were already healing, but her sapphire eyes blazed with triumph and newfound confidence. Darius vaulted over the arena wall and crossed to her in swift strides, his own shirt torn away so she could cover herself. When he pulled her into his arms, the mate bond completed fully, golden light blazing around them both as their souls finally, truly, became one. "My queen," he whispered against her hair, and the words carried across the arena for all to hear. "My mate, my everything." The pack erupted in howls of recognition and joy, the sound echoing off the mountain walls like thunder. Their lost queen had returned, proven herself in combat, and claimed her rightful place beside the Alpha King. But even as Lyra basked in her victory and the mate bond's completion, her enhanced senses caught something that made her blood run cold. Celeste was gone. In the chaos of celebration, the defeated challenger had vanished from the arena. The daughter of her parents' murderer was still alive, still dangerous, and now she had nothing left to lose. The great hall had been transformed into a court of judgment, its stone walls echoing with the weight of 20 years of buried secrets finally dragged into the light. Torches blazed in their sconces, casting dancing shadows across the assembled pack as they gathered to witness the reckoning that had been 2 decades in the making. Elder Mira stood at the centre of the hall, no longer the quiet, unassuming figure who had worked in the shadows to protect a hidden queen. Power radiated from her ancient form, the authority of someone who had kept faith through years of darkness and was finally free to speak the truth. "Members of the Silver Moon Pack," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "You have witnessed the return of your rightful queen. Now you must hear the truth of how she came to be lost to you." Lyra stood beside Darius at the head table, wearing a simple dress of silver silk that had belonged to her mother. The royal pendant gleamed at her throat, its sapphire eyes catching the torchlight and throwing it back in patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner fire. She felt the weight of every gaze upon her, but no longer with the crushing shame of a servant caught above her station. Now she met their stares with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally claimed her birthright. 20 years ago, Elder Mira continued, our beloved Queen Selene and King Marcus ruled with wisdom and compassion. They were strong leaders who put the welfare of the pack above their own comfort, who fought to protect the weak and ensure justice for all. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many remembered those golden days when the pack had prospered under royal leadership that valued honour above politics. But there were those who coveted what was not theirs to take, those who believed that bloodlines could be stolen through murder, that power could be seized through betrayal. Elder Mira's eyes found Marcus Silverclaw in the crowd, and the older man's face had gone ashen. On the night of the winter solstice, assassins struck at the heart of our pack. The hall fell silent except for the crackling of torches and the whispered prayers of those who remembered that terrible night. Lyra felt Darius's hand find hers beneath the table, his touch anchoring her as Elder Mira began to paint the scene of her parents' murder in words that cut like blades. "I arrived too late to save them," the elder said, her ancient voice heavy with grief that 20 years had not diminished. Queen Selene lay dying in a pool of her own blood, King Marcus beside her, both of them killed by wolves they had trusted, wolves they had welcomed into their home. "Lies!" Marcus Silverclaw suddenly shouted from his place in the crowd, his composure finally cracking under the weight of accusation. "You speak lies and fantasy, old woman. Everyone knows the royal couple died in a hunting accident." "Did they?" Eldamira's voice carried a dangerous quiet that made even the boldest wolves take a step back. "Then explain this." She held up a piece of parchment, its edges yellowed with age, but its contents still clearly visible. "A letter written in your own hand, Marcus Silverclaw, detailing your plans to eliminate the royal bloodline and claim the pack for yourself." Gasps echoed through the hall as pack members craned their necks to see the damning evidence. Marcus's face went from pale to grey, sweat beading on his forehead as his carefully constructed world began to crumble around him. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, but his voice lacked the authority it had once carried. "That's a forgery, a fake created to—" "To what? Frame an innocent man?" Elder Mira laughed, but the sound was bitter as winter wind. "This letter was found clutched in Queen Selene's hand when I discovered her body. She tore it from your pocket as you killed her, ensuring that evidence of your treachery would survive even if she did not." The crowd was beginning to shift restlessly, pack loyalty wavering as the magnitude of the betrayal became clear. These were wolves who had served the Silverclaw family for 20 years, believing them to be legitimate leaders. To learn that their loyalty had been built on murder and lies struck at the very foundation of their world. "There's more," Elder Mira continued relentlessly. "Marcus, tell the pack about the other bloodlines you eliminated. Tell them about the Moon Whisper family, killed in their sleep 3 months before the royal couple died. Tell them about the Starfang twins, found dead at the bottom of Ravine Falls with claw marks that matched your wolf form." Each revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Marcus Silverclaw hadn't just killed the royal family. He had systematically eliminated anyone whose bloodline might challenge his claim to power. The hunting accidents, the mysterious disappearances, the tragic deaths that had marked his rise to leadership, all of it had been calculated murder. "And when it was done," Elder Mira said, her voice rising to fill every corner of the hall, "when the blood had been washed from his claws and the bodies buried, Marcus Silverclaw declared himself the rightful leader of a pack he had stolen through genocide." The word hung in the air like a physical weight. Genocide, the systematic elimination of entire bloodlines to clear a path to power. Around the hall, pack members were beginning to understand the full scope of what they had unknowingly supported for 2 decades. But Marcus wasn't finished fighting. With the desperation of a cornered animal, he lunged forward, his voice cracking with fury and fear. "Even if your lies were true," he snarled, "it changes nothing. The royal bloodline died with Selene and her whelp. This pretender," he pointed a shaking finger at Lyra, "is nothing more than a servant with delusions and magical trinkets." "Is she?" Elder Mira smiled, and there was something coldly satisfied in her expression. "Then you won't mind if we test that claim?" She gestured to 2 pack members who had been standing guard near the entrance. Between them, they dragged a figure that made several people gasp in recognition. It was Jonas Blackmane, one of Marcus's most trusted lieutenants and a wolf who had served the Silverclaw family faithfully for 20 years. But Jonas looked different now. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of someone whose world had collapsed around him. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was there," he said, the words torn from his throat like broken glass. "I was there the night they died. I helped kill them." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled pack. Jonas had been a respected member of their community, a wolf whose word carried weight. If he was confessing to murder, then everything Elder Mira had said was true. "Tell them," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of ancient magic. "Tell them what really happened that night." Jonas's confession poured out like poison from an infected wound. He described the planning, the careful selection of trusted wolves who could be bought or coerced into betrayal. He detailed how they had waited until the royal couple was alone in their private chambers, how they had struck without warning or mercy. "The Queen fought," he whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Even dying, she fought to protect the baby. Marcus had to tear the child from her arms while she bled out on the floor." Lyra felt the mate bond pulse with Darius's protective rage, his wolf snarling at the images Jonas's words painted. Through their connection, she drew strength from his love and fury, using them to maintain her composure as she heard the details of her parents' final moments. "And then," Elder Mira prompted, when Jonas fell silent, "then we searched the nursery for the princess, but she was gone. Marcus flew into a rage, demanding to know where the baby was hidden. He tortured the servants, killed anyone who might have helped hide her." Jonas looked directly at Lyra, his eyes filled with 20 years of guilt. "We never found her. Marcus spent years hunting for any trace of the royal heir, but she had vanished completely." "Because I hid her," Elder Mira said simply. "I cast the strongest suppression spell I knew, made her appear to be nothing more than an abandoned orphan with a broken wolf. I gave her to the servants to raise, watched her grow up invisible and forgotten, while the wolves who had murdered her parents ruled in their place." The revelation completed the circle, connecting past and present in a chain of evidence that no one could deny. Around the hall, pack members were beginning to understand that the servant girl they had ignored and abused for 20 years was the lost princess they had been told was dead. Marcus Silverclaw made one final, desperate attempt to salvage his position. "You have no proof," he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Stories and confessions mean nothing without—" He never finished the sentence. Elder Mira held up a second item, this one glowing with soft silver light that made the torches seem dim by comparison. It was a crown, delicate and beautiful, wrought from silver and moonstone in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. "Queen Celine's crown," she announced, and every wolf in the hall felt the power radiating from the ancient artifact. Worn by generations of royal blood, responsive only to the true heir. She walked to where Lyra sat, her movements reverent as she approached with the symbol of ultimate authority. If she is truly nothing more than a servant with delusions, then the crown will reject her. Royal artifacts cannot be fooled by trickery or magic. They know blood and acknowledge only truth. Lyra rose from her chair, feeling the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a mantle. Every eye in the hall was fixed on her as Elder Mira lifted the crown above her head. "But if she is who she claims to be," the elder continued, "then this crown will recognize its rightful owner." The moment the silver touched Lyra's hair, the hall erupted in blazing light. The crown flared with power so intense that many pack members had to shield their eyes, its ancient magic recognizing and celebrating the return of the royal bloodline. Lyra stood transfigured, no longer a servant or even a queen in waiting, but a ruler crowned by forces older than memory. Around the hall, wolves dropped to their knees in instinctive submission. The crown's recognition was absolute, undeniable, marking her as the true and rightful heir to everything that had been stolen. Marcus Silverclaw's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor as the weight of his crimes finally caught up with him. 20 years of lies and murder had been exposed in a single moment of supernatural truth. "Seize him!" Darius commanded, his alpha authority combining with his mate's royal power to create a force that no one could resist. Seize all of them. Let justice finally be served. As pack guards moved to arrest the conspirators, Lyra stood crowned and vindicated, her silver light filling every corner of the great hall. The lost princess had returned, the rightful queen had been revealed, and the pack that had unknowingly served murderers for 20 years finally learned the truth of their royal bloodline. The reckoning was complete.